For the last 15 years, we celebrated the quantitative analytical marketers. And I think increasingly, we need marketers who are good at creating influence and working collaboratively with their peers. When AI can flood the market with content, it makes it harder to stand out unless you have generally good brand recognition. We have to lean into our personal relationships and our brand relationships to get the content to sort of not be ignored.
Today's guest definitely doesn't need an introduction, but I'll go ahead and do it anyway. Jon Miller co-founded Marketo and helped create the marketing automation category as we know it. And he went on to found Engagio, which helped kind of solidify and build the account-based marketing category before the acquisition by Demandbase, where he went on to serve as CMO. And today he's building Phave, a stealth AI native MarTech company to reinvent the B2B demand generation playbook. I'm so honored to have him on the show. Welcome, Jon Miller.
It's always awesome to hang out and talk marketing with you. Thanks for having me.
So awesome. You're a hero of mine, Jon. And so I just appreciate how much over the years you've kind of been willing to have conversations like this one. So thank you so much. I said this in your intro, but you've helped, honestly, define eras of MarTech from Marketo to Engagio and Demandbase. When you zoom out, how do you think about the different chapters of the MarTech story that you've been a part of, and what defined each of those chapters in your mind?
Well, I think there's probably even a chapter before Marketo, which might be worth mentioning, which was Epiphany, which is where I started working right out of business school, along with Phil Fernandez and Dave Randy, who went on to be my Marketo co-founders. If you had to give a name to that chapter, it was on-premise, right? This was traditional legacy enterprise software, where we were helping companies do very complex segmentation database marketing. We sold Epiphany, and that's when Phil and I started talking about kind of starting a new company circa kind of 2005, 2006, so that let's just call that for me personally, 2006 to 2015 era, about the 9 years I was there. If I had to give that era a name, I'd call it earning the seat, where we really tried at Marketo to help marketing, prove that it was part of the revenue engine and not a cost center. And we did that with what I now call the traditional B2B marketing playbook, which is leads and MQLs and content and nurturing, and everything's very highly measurable. By the end of my time at Marketo, I think, we sort of proved that playbook worked, but also we were starting to see some of the limitations. One of those limitations was that it was very focused on the individual. And when the reality is, when businesses buy things, it was very focused on what I would call fishing with a net, which is, I'm going to throw it out there and see who I get, as opposed to precision, this is who I want. And that's what led then to the next era, which for me would sort of be combining Engagio and Demandbase together into the ABM, era. So let's say for me, 2015 to 2022. I think, so obviously ABM became a thing. And in some ways, it was the failure of Marketo and the other platforms to innovate that made that opportunity for its kind of own category. So obviously, Engagio merged with Demandbase. I became the CMO at Demandbase in 2020, and that was a really formative experience for me, because I ran the same playbook that I ran at Marketo at Demandbase. And yet the exact same things that used to work so brilliantly at Marketo, and everybody thought I was a marketing hero, just weren't working as well at Demandbase. And what I eventually, I think, came to really firmly believe is that yes, you have to have a good demand gen and a good marketing operation playbook, but you really also need a strong brand and product market fit to support that. And Marketo had
Right.
those, and that really helped everything I did at Marketo. And that Demandbase, I think maybe Demandbase has gotten a lot better in the last couple of years, but at the time, I would say Demandbase's brand served as a headwind and not a tailwind.
Mm.
And that I really came to appreciate in that era, the 95-5 problem, right? Which is, most buyers aren't in market. You can be doing all this demand gen you want, but if you're not building a brand to create that awareness and be the first when they think of when they start the buying process, you've already lost.
Right.
And then now, I'm in my new era with this stealth startup, which call it, the AI native era. And we're all still writing this chapter.
Right.
And if the theme, if anything, it's probably what was never possible before is now possible. I've been pursuing, if there's one thing that goes across Epiphany to Marketo to Engagio, and now it's been trying to pursue true one-to-one personalization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the technology is finally catching up with that promise that we've been chasing for 25 years.
Yes. Well, you've said, I think as part of the story of Phave is this idea of, because of that thing that didn't exist, because of the ability to scale that kind of one-to-one touch, we can now fix finally what is broken in B2B demand generation. So I was hoping to start there. What is broken? How do you sort of frame the problem set with the current landscape on the demand side?
Yeah. Well, I think it's worth pointing out that the metrics, I think, support this point of view of it being broken, right? I'm not just claiming that. Qualitatively, ask a group of demand gen marketers or CMOs, and they're going to tell you it's hard.
Yeah.
Quantitatively, a dollar of new ARR costs 70% more to generate today than it did back in 2021.
Wow.
Even as marketing budgets are going down, only 50% of teams are hitting their pipeline goals, and SDR, the number of quality conversations per SDR has dropped by 55% since 2014, according to the Bridge Group. So, I think that just the numbers, the economics show that old playbook is declining. I think there's a couple of core reasons behind it, but if I maybe really just try to simplify it down, I think first is just the model got it wrong. The traditional model that I'd preached at Marketo, I think, treated marketing like a gumball machine. Right. Where the whole demand gen mindset was, you put a dollar of campaign in, you're going to get X number of leads out. And we built our pipeline models and our budgets based on like a reverse waterfall that assumed that linearity. I need this much pipeline. Well, that means I need this many MQLs. I need this much budget. But the reality is, buying isn't a simple linear process, right? Buying is a complex, nonlinear system. Think about any purchase you've been involved with. 6 to 16 people on a buying committee, moving very unpredictably through right. a sales cycle, and increasingly most of that journey happening anonymously. The conversation on the golf course or in the private community, the subtle influences that happen out there that will never be tracked properly in any attribution system. And the problem is, increasingly the buyers are making those decisions in that anonymous phase. 6 Sense research says that by the time somebody contacts sales, 80% of the buyers have their preferred vendor, and they buy from that day one shortlist 92% of the time. Wow. So like, if you're not there, no amount of demand gen is going to be fixing. It also suggests this nonlinear thinking mode suggests that trying to do things like attribution is just a fool's errand.
Right.
I said B2B buying is a complex nonlinear system. So complex nonlinear systems are well studied. Things like the weather and the stock market. And you've probably heard of chaos theory, which is the way we study complex nonlinear systems, right? And though they are inherently unpredictable, they are inherently the property is sensitive dependence on initial conditions, which you've probably heard of as the butterfly flapping and swing in Brazil causing the hurricane in Japan.
Right.
So you get that intuitively for the weather, but the same thing is going on in B2B buying. What caused that purchase? The reality is we don't know. And trying to sort of claim that we do is like trying to predict the weather 6 months from now. It's just not going to happen. I think the other thing that went wrong with the traditional playbook is we used the wrong metrics. We tried to make it measurable. We tried to say, let's generate MQLs. And that drove marketers to, I would say, bad behaviors, marketers and salespeople, right? We need more MQLs. Well, let's just run more campaigns, or let's send more emails. Let's gate that content because that's how we're going to generate the MQLs. And effectively, almost everything we did to drive those metrics were at the expense of what is a good buyer experience.
Totally.
And over time, that hurt us, and we trained the buyers to avoid us, right? That's why they're researching anonymously. It's why they're sort of doing their work before they ever contact sales. It's why pipeline numbers are dropping. So fundamentally, right? What's wrong with the playbook? If we bombard buyers with unwanted emails and sick SDRs on anyone who downloads an ebook, that's not building relationships. It's burning them.
Right. Well, John, what's really compelling is I'm, I think listening to this feels only in hindsight, of course, like so obvious in a way, right? Like, of course we were going to be burning them out. Of course, this friction is kind of, forcing a transaction versus building a relationship. And so I can imagine a lot of people are listening to this, following the content that you've been putting out on LinkedIn, and nodding their heads and being like, yes, like finally, this makes a lot of sense. And then they go back to the board meeting, right? Or the pipeline call or whatever. And we're back to like MQLs or however we've conditioned kind of, our stakeholders that we work with, board members and so on, to think about marketing. And it feels like there's this, and obviously you've been doing so much work here, but we need to re-educate the world in a way on what marketing's role is, the value we provide, how to measure it, if not by the traditional kind of means. How do we evoke change? How do we actually evolve the practice and bring kind of our board along, bring our CFO along, maybe our head of sales into whatever comes next?
Let me start by saying this is really hard, right? This is not easy. I've talked to so many marketers where this is like the number one thing that they are struggling with.
Yeah.
For the last 15 years, we celebrated the quantitative analytical marketers. And I think increasingly we need marketers who are good at creating influence and working collaboratively with their peers, helping to explain what, that things are different.
Yeah.
I posted recently about a method that I've used in my past somewhat effectively, which is the Socratic approach. And so don't go to your CFO and say, I need to invest in brand, or I need to change my metrics. You ask them, hey, you remember last year when we purchased a new accounting system or HR system or whatever? How did you find that vendor? Right? What did you know about them before we went into things? Right? Did you fill out a form and wait for an SDR to call you? Right? Did you talk to your peers? Did you kind of have your preferred vendor before you went into things? Like, Socratically ask this, and the answer is always going to be the same, right? Like, they probably did not follow a buying journey that right. Map to the way that they're asking you to measure your buyer's journey. And if you can get them there, then it just sort of naturally leads to like, okay, so if that's how you buy and our customers are buy, how should we measure? What should we be looking at? And then the other tip is this can't be coming just from marketing. If when it's just marketing saying, oh, buying has changed and the metrics are different, that sounds like marketing complaining. But if it's cross-functional coalition with sales and CS and product and RevOps, and they're all saying that the old playbook is broken, right? Then it's a business problem, not a marketing complaint. And you're not changing marketing, you're fixing the revenue engine.
It's very tactically. There's something to be said there, right? Of almost like going out versus going up to some extent. Like, how do we build the coalition, to use that language, with our sales peers, our CS peers, maybe bringing that same kind of Socratic kind of approach to facilitating that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Interesting. Well, I want to ask you about building again, and building in the AI era, of course, where everyone, of course, is saying they're AI native or whatever that means. But you referenced again earlier in the opening that we're able to do things today, of course, that we weren't able to do 5-10 years ago. And I'm curious, to the extent you're willing to share, like, what are you doing fundamentally different this time around that otherwise would have been impossible in the years before, or in your other ventures?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the biggest change, and it's a deep, profound, fundamental change, is the shift from rules to reasoning. So marketing automation, marketing platforms, they're all glorified rules-based systems. I'll give you a couple examples, right? If they open the email, add 1 point to their score. If they are in financial services, send them this email, right? Even, nurture tracks, right? When somebody opens a new account, put them into this 3-step sequence, right?
Yes.
Those are all deterministic, rules-based activities. And the problem with rules is that the real world is complex, and you have scenarios. So even if you just want to do something as simple as mapping somebody to the right persona, and just looking at their title and other things, every nuance of, you have to look at, you end up having more and more and more and more rules to capture more and more edge cases. And even then, you'll never kind of figure out that director of operations can mean all sorts of different things depending on different contexts. It's why most companies at best have like 2 or 3 nurture tracks, because you just can't build out 1 million or 10,000 for 10,000 possible customers. The more rules you write, the more brittle it becomes, the more unmaintainable it becomes. And I think if anybody's seen a mature Marketo instance, they kind of know what I mean, right? They quickly become a mess. So what AI enables, that just so magical, is its ability to reason and think. Kind of, all right, I've got Anthony here, and here's everything I know about him. What action should I take? What journey? What should I do now, and then what should I do tomorrow, and what should I do the next day? The analogy I like to use is a Spotify playlist DJ, making a playlist, right? That's using AI, and based on our interests and preferences and things we like, to mix up, your personalized playlist. That's your journey, which is going to be different from anybody else's. That's what reasoning allows, and it can learn.
Right.
So it puts an email on your playlist for Thursday, and you don't open it, and then tries something else on Sunday, and you respond to that one. It starts to learn. Oh, Anthony likes to check email on Sundays.
Right.
Those are, again, you'll never make that work with rules.
Right.
And so, there's a lot more to say, I think, about what it means to build marketing platforms in the kind of AI native world. And I think we'll get to that I think one of your later questions.
Yeah.
But this kind of move from rules to reasoning is, I think, the real unlock that makes this such a transformation.
It's super compelling, and it brings up just this some mantra or some, I don't know, it could have been a tweet that I saw, but someone had said that demand generation has become an engineering problem now. This idea of reasoning and memory and state and all of this, it feels like terminology that folks kind of in engineering are thinking through. When you hear things like Anthropic at $400 billion of scale, um, are they're able to get there with a single non-technical growth marketer, like using Claude and everything else to kind of prompt their way to growth, for lack of a better term. How does that sit with you, or how do you think through kind of the signal that anecdotes like that are sending around where demand gen might be headed?
Yeah, well, let's talk about Anthropic specifically first, and then kind of the general trend. I mean, because I think Anthropic is an outlier, and it proves the point, but probably not the one that you're referring to.
Not a very relatable example, maybe, but
I
one
mean, they're
nonetheless.
skilled. Yeah, I mean, they're adding billions of revenue a quarter, in an unprecedented way, but that's not because of their demand gen machine, right? They are driving that kind of crazy growth through extraordinary product market fit
Yes.
and brand.
Yeah.
So I think what it actually proves is, if you have a strong brand and strong product market fit, then everything else works better. It's by Demandbase versus Marketo experience, but taken to the 100th degree. When you have that kind of pull, you can have relatively simple demand machinery, and it'll work.
Yeah.
So the bigger question is, what about all the other companies, right? Who don't have that luxury, of Anthropic level luxury, which is, by the way, all of us. So first off, like, it's why I'm saying the start has to be focusing on brand and awareness and product market fit. And even if your title is head of demand gen, like, if you're not thinking about those things, I think you are going down a path of kind of not being successful. Now, this is not to say that there aren't great places to apply, quote unquote, engineering to scaling a good demand gen process.
Right.
Even reasoning AI would like to have good data to work from. And how do you pipe good data into the system? Fine, that's potentially an engineering problem. So I think if you kind of put it together, a company like Marketo was successful because we had all those things working. Right? We had product market fit, we had a good brand, and we had a good revenue engine machine running. Can you get by without all three? Maybe, but I don't know if you'll ever be like a hyper grower.
Right. Well, let's stay on Anthropic for 1 second, because there's this I don't know, view as well that AI can over time become kind of the primary interface for where work gets done, and it's Claude work, right, and some of these other tools, where folks are at least hypothesizing that that could be one outcome. Um, if that were the case, if you were to follow that through, does Martech, as we know it, at least, even survive? Does it just become infrastructure behind the scenes, and we're all MCPing basically in and out of Claude? Like, do you buy that as a possible outcome? And curious, kind of what you think that would mean for the industry, kind of more broadly.
I think it's probably going to be a little more nuanced than just that, not surprisingly. So first, let's tackle the easy part, which is just kind of interface.
Yeah.
Like I love creating new campaigns in Claude. Right? Even in my own tool, like, hey, here's a LinkedIn post I just put up. Go turn this into an email campaign in Phave, right? And have it do that for me over MCP is great. Of course I love that. I think that most marketers will still want an interface where they can at least review what the AI has done.
Right.
And text is not always the right mode for that. So and then there's certain things that a power user can just do better and faster in a well-designed interface than they will kind of over chat. So as I said, on the UI side, it's going to be a bit of both. Use text and chat where you can, because it is magical and great. And then other times there's going to be specialized interfaces. Where I think the more interesting or deeper discussion goes is more on the architecture side. Scott Brinker published a report last month about what he calls the composable canvas, and introducing kind of a multi-layer new architecture for MarTech away from the traditional stack, which is actually remarkably similar to a framework that I talk about. So I'm going to use mine, but just know that these are very connected ideas.
Totally.
I like to think about the future MarTech stack as having 3 alliterative layers. There's a data layer. On top of that is a decisioning layer. And on top of that is a delivery layer. For what's worth, Scott has a data layer, then he has a decisioning and governance layer, and then he has a semantic layer as well, and then a what he calls an apps layer. So mine's more alliterative, but regardless, where I think he and I both think we're going to get to is over the future, in next 5 years or so, that data layer will probably get more standardized. Right now, there's not a marketer I've met in the last 2 years who says my data is great. Nobody says it's all in a perfect Snowflake data warehouse or data lake, and it's perfectly optimized for marketing's needs.
Right.
There's still some work that needs to happen, but that's probably the general trend, is moving closer to that. On the delivery layer, or what he would call the apps side, I think we all think we're going to see fragmentation there. Whether that's because people can vibe code new apps all the time, or even like channel, like today in MarTech, email is a major channel that we use, but there's going to be new channels kind of all the time. And so that I think piece of the stack does become increasingly composable. And there'll just be a bunch of apps or delivery tools that we use. Where the magic is going to happen, where the most interesting piece of the future MarTech stack is going to be what I call the decisioning layer, which has 2 important pieces to it, and you can't have one without the other. The first piece is the reasoning that we've already talked about. The AI agents that say, I've got Anthony, what do I know about him? What should we do? How am I going to craft his playlist of the right actions at the right time? But just as important is the context and governance layer, or what Scott calls context as a service. And this is all the information that guides those agents to make the right decisions and do the right things. I think there are 4 kinds of context that matter. Anybody who's listening, if you've used Claude Code or Claude Cowork, they know that Claude has something called a claude.md file. And that's the instructions that you're giving Claude. So what we need is a marketing.md file that does things like, when we build a campaign, follow these naming conventions. Always use these UTM parameters following these UTM guidelines. And when somebody says, I want to target somebody in financial services, what I mean is use this field, because there are 6 industry fields in my crappy CRM database. So that's all information that like a marketing operations person might know in their head. But part of getting context right is to put that into this kind of shared file. The second piece of context people might know from Claude is like Claude memory. As you use the system, it builds memory and it learns about you. Same should be true for a marketing platform. As you build campaigns, as you name the campaigns, as you add segmentations and exclusions, and as those campaigns run and you see what works and doesn't work, that should build your marketing memory about what works and doesn't work to guide those agents, over time. Then the third one, a piece of context, are your hard rules, the things that cannot be violated, because in marketing, those things matter, right? You may not email somebody who does not have consent, or you may face very large fines. You might also have a rule that says you can't email somebody more than 3 times a week, right? Or whatever other hard rules you want to put in place. The last form of context is the simplest, which is just how do we sound, right? In marketing,
voice and tone and
and all that kind of stuff, so that there will be all of those types of context need to become shared services. Over time, that work across different agents and across different systems. So maybe, so that was a pretty deep dive, right?
Yeah.
But like MarTech will survive as infrastructure, right? It's going to be decisioning and context and governance. So it's going to probably look pretty different than it has in the past.
Right. It's super interesting. It just feels like there's so much, like innovation wouldn't be selling it short, but we're bringing first principles into everything, into the entire stack, and rebuilding it from the ground up, which is powerful and exciting for folks that are building in this era and in this time.
It is. It's also really hard.
It's also
so fast. Like, you think you know where the goalpost is, and then 6 months later, it's completely in a different place.
Yeah, you can almost hear the hesitation in my voice, where I'm like, I'm really excited, but also this is so hard to just figure it out and put the chips on the table and be right, or thinking we're right. But it's encouraging to hear kind of you're skating to the same general puck as Scott and some of these other just great thinkers of the time. And I want to get your take on this, because one thing I'd say semi-unique, tell me if this is unique from your network and your vantage point, but from where I'm sitting is the CMO turned founder kind of profile is one that feels more rare in the broader ecosystem. And you're building again. So point blank, do you think CMOs make for good founders?
So I think of myself as a founder first, who happens to have been a good CMO, in the past. So, do I think CMOs make good founders? I mean, my honest answer is not necessarily. I think being a great CMO means you have some real advantages around understanding markets and buyers and positioning and how to build a brand. And those are all incredibly valuable aspects to being a founder. I think you also need to have a product sense and the ability to think about how to translate business problems into product solutions, and ideally enough technical depth to be able to kind of work with the engineers, even if you're not writing code yourself. So as you may know, my undergrad is in physics, and I actually got a unofficial minor in computer science. So, I'm not a programmer, but I think I can at least, not sound fluffy with engineers. The last thing I'll say, which I think it reflects your experience, is, if you're going to be in MarTech, then being a CMO background is of course a help, right? Because you have better, what I call founder market fit. You understand the market, you understand the buyer. In my case, I have credibility and a network selling into marketing that I wouldn't otherwise have. So the last thing I'll say is I took an entrepreneurship class back at Stanford Business School with Irv Grausbeck, who is He founded, I'm blanking. He founded one of the top cable companies, but he's also an amazing professor of entrepreneurship. And the one thing that he stressed is to be an entrepreneur, you don't have to have the skills. You don't have to have the money. You don't have to have the idea even. You just need the ability to collect together the things you need. And so if you are a CMO and you're interested in founding and you don't have the technical skills or the product skills necessarily, that's okay. You just need the ability to then make sure you get those skills onto your team early on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, especially in this era, right? Like if you were to play back this podcast 4 years ago, 5 years ago, like to talk about just some of the technical concepts and architecture that we've already stepped through, I think it's we have to be, if you're a CMO interested in starting a company, like you have to be not just proficient in understanding how products are built and go from 0 to 1 and how to work with engineering anyway, but you have to keep up with this pace of innovation that we're seeing around new concepts that are entering our consciousness every week at this point. And so I would agree with you as someone who started a company as a founder and it didn't work out. Honestly, most of my issues were all around my ability to adapt as on the product and engineering side of the business. And so here's to getting it right the second time, but definitely, we're just naturally haven't spent enough time in that space. And I think that today it's just going to be such a existential level of importance that we do.
Fingers crossed for you.
Thank you
on that one.
Motivated, and good news is we learn so much from failure. So I'm taking that with me here. But for those CMOs who are like, okay, I don't want to start a company, but like I want to thrive in this AI era, and I'm feeling as an operator a little overwhelmed because the playbook, again, that I've built my career on isn't working. And a lot of things are changing around expectations around my role. And I think there's this desire to be operating from a place of first principles, which I've heard from other folks we've kind of brought onto the show, and have that intellectual curiosity feels like an increasingly valued skill set within kind of the executive team. But from where you're sitting, like, how do you think about what will define kind of the next generation marketing leaders and CMOs, and what will need to change for them to be able to thrive in this new era?
Well, first of all, they have to change. There's no doubt in my mind that the CMO role is in crisis. Right now. 34% of the Fortune 500 don't have a CMO, according to Spencer Stewart. Bauhaus says only 32% of CEOs trust their CMOs. And I have personally talked to so many CMOs who say like the job feels unsustainable and impossible, with 67% of marketing leaders saying that it's actually impacting their well-being. Wow. Because it's like, so hard. So something has to change, right? Some of the other root causes of the problem, I think, first, a lot of CMOs have let themselves become the recipients of strategy and not a core driver of the strategy. I've heard people I respect greatly say, the job of the CMO is to, support the sales team and make sure the sales team, has everything they need. That worries me a little bit, strategically. Marketing is the only C-suite title that is named after the function rather than the outcome, right? The CFO is responsible for financial health, finance. The COO is responsible for operational excellence. Even the chief sales officer, that was both, right? But a chief revenue officer is the outcome.
Right, outcome.
CMO, marketing, right? It's structurally titled as, to be seen as more tactical. That's why some CMOs try to call themselves the chief market officer, instead of chief marketing.
Chief go-to-market I've seen too, like some of
Yeah,
these
I'm version of that.
derivations.
So, what are the best practices? What should CMOs be doing? I mean, obviously we could do a whole podcast on that, but some quick hits are: one, first and foremost, got to have the first team mentality. Your team is the CEO and your C-suite peers, not the marketing org. Understand each of your peers' P&L challenges and get good at showing how marketing helps them. Be radically transparent about risks, surface problems early, like be the one to show, name the problems and show the past before people speak, and as much as possible, try to speak the financial language of business, even while you're pushing for things like brand awareness and competitive positioning and things like that. My hope, just to kind of close this out, is as AI can take on more of the tactical execution of the job of marketing, that the modern CMO can increasingly focus on the things that AI can't. Things like understanding the market, shaping the narrative, building relationships, creating human experiences. I think those are some of the things that the CMO of the future will thrive at.
Talk a little bit more about that too, in terms of why those things are important relative to just being the sort of like pipeline hero or whatever kind of the previous kind of caricature was. We've spoken about brand before, and you've referenced it on in this conversation quite a bit. But why now? Why is it increasingly, I keep using the term existential, but just like such a fundamental driver of this next wave than it's been historically in the past?
Yeah, I think it's honestly more just the pendulum swinging back and recognizing that this matters in a way that we sort of all had some collective delusion for a little while that maybe we could get away with just having good demand generation. But there is an AI amplifier, I think. When AI can flood the market with content, it makes it harder to stand out unless you have generally good brand recognition. When buyers are using AI agents to research vendors, it increasingly means we have to be on that short list, as and show up based on the awareness and the ethos and the ecosystem, rather than somehow they're going to get caught in our net. And we need that trust. You can't, the way you get known and trusted and recommended by the AI, I think comes from getting the fundamentals right, way more than, any amount of, optimization that you might be able to do.
Right.
So yeah, brand always mattered. We sort of maybe convinced ourselves that it didn't because we couldn't measure it as easily. But I don't think it ever went away.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I have to comment on these cocktail videos that you've been dropping on LinkedIn, mixing drinks while kind of sharing some marketing wisdom and insights, which I put into the brand kind of bucket more broadly, at least. But what inspired by that? And it looks like you're having fun doing them. Like, what are you learning from dropping those videos?
Yeah, it started because a while back. I mean, LinkedIn has things changed their algorithm, but a year and a half ago, the whole theme was, LinkedIn's going to really be pushing their video content. So I'm like, well, how can I produce more video? And my wife had the idea, like, well, why don't you make a cocktail video? I think probably inspired by like Stanley Tucci or some videos that she'd seen. Of course, then I created the first one, and we all quickly realized that I'm no Stanley Tucci in front of the camera, unfortunately. But as you said, I do have some fun making them. But it's really interesting, I think, beyond that, what I've learned, because the raw metrics, like the number of views that LinkedIn says I get and the impressions would say that the videos underperform a lot of my other kinds of posts. Um, Fairly dramatically,
Okay.
actually, given the fact that they take so much more time and effort to produce. And yet it's what everybody wants to talk to me about.
Yeah. Totally.
So it clearly stands out in a way that go beyond what the metrics
Yeah.
themselves directly capture. And I think it's a perfect example of what we've been talking about here,
Yeah.
which is that, we can't only rely on what's easily measured, and the brand impact can be real even when the dashboard doesn't show it.
And there's a very like human element to it too, in my mind, where we get to see just a peek behind the curtain at, Jon, not just the prolific founder, Martech kind of, thought leader, but Jon, the human, the mixologist, however, we want to kind of think about it. And my sense is like, this is like showcasing more humanity in the brand. Obviously it's the name of the show here. So for a tip of the hat, but, it kind of helps us differentiate from this like sloppy AI content that is infiltrating our feeds, where we kind of don't know what's real anymore either. And I draw a lot of inspiration from the OpenAI brand campaign that launched, I think it was earlier this year, maybe late last year. And I think Anthropic did one similarly that you would expect to feel so like cold and robotic, but it felt very human and warm and nostalgic almost even. And so do you believe this idea that human, almost like showing up in a human authentic way, also can be a differentiator for not just you and me, maybe as founders, I suppose, but like for brands themselves going forward?
Hugely important. I mean, AI, when AI has made content production nearly free, increasingly the source of the content matters more than the substance, because we're just so overwhelmed. We can't read everything.
Yeah.
And so we have to lean into, our personal relationships and our brand relationships, to get the content to sort of not be ignored. So there's so many versions of that in B2B, ranging from, partners and ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
Having a partner, like a vendor they already work with, say, oh, hey, that company, was good, or you should pay attention to this. That helps stand out because there's already some trusted connection there. I think it's why influencers are a thing. They've been a thing in B2C, and I think increasingly they do kind of matter in B2B.
Yeah.
Obviously LinkedIn really seems to value, very niche influencers, and that's okay. So we may not see the massive influencers we see in consumer.
Right.
But then you mentioned founders, right? And I think the whole idea of founder-led brand is a thing, because it's how you kind of create that, your own influence and your own kind of connection, if you will.
Right.
So, so yeah, just in the world of AI, I think relationships really matter. Two other things that I think matter are in experiences, like actual in-person human connection, something very near and dear to your heart, of events.
Yes.
A great event experience cannot be summarized or filtered by an AI agent.
No.
And if the digital content is trivially easy to produce, the physical and experiential becomes the differentiator.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then the last bucket, I just call craftsmanship, which to me is a category for any content, or really any aspect that clearly required significant human and expertise and original thinking. Like we can see that, whether it's a really awesome produced funny video or something, or something that's just beautifully designed,
Yeah.
or even like proprietary research that
Yeah.
needed to be thought through and created, you know, that we can see that as humans, you know. And so if the slop can be generated quickly, then evidence of genuine work becomes like a trust signal. So relationships, experiences, and craftsmanship to me are like the holy trinity of, you know, how you really stand out in the world of AI slop.
I love that. I love it so much. John, I can keep talking to you. I don't know how much time you have, but I know we're getting close here. So let me just close on a personal question to the extent you're willing to share it. You referenced this earlier, that there's just so much happening so fast that just keeping up with all of this can be exhausting, whether it's maybe us kind of building in this new world, but also just for operators trying to reinvent themselves and stay productive. How do you manage to stay grounded and to invest sort of in your own sense of humanity through all of this pace and the rate of change that we're all experiencing?
If I'm honest, I think this is hard. It's a hard time right now. You know, the World Uncertainty Index, which I found out about, you know, not long ago, tracks uncertainty, and it's right now the levels that it's tracking are higher than either the 2008 financial crisis or COVID.
Wow.
You know, and I think we all feel that, like, you know, what is the AI future mean for jobs? What's happening geopolitically? You know, it's a hard time out there. So how do I deal with that? You know, I mean, first off, I think, like many founders, I am an optimist. It's hard to be a founder if you're not an optimist.
Yes.
You know, and so I generally, you know, am able to sort of find positive in things on a daily basis, and kind of remain hopeful, you know, even while there is, I think, things to worry about in the future. Personally, I try to make sure that I am taking care of myself for the long run. I am 54. My dad died at 64 from health-related issues. That's not so long from now. And so I sort of always, you know, really am trying to think about, how do I make sure that, yes, I'm working hard, but I'm also exercising and doing what I need to do to, you know, be intentional about my health. And then the last bucket is one where, frankly, I probably could be even better at than I am, but maintaining real human connections. Not, you know, not LinkedIn connections,
Yeah.
but, you know, real conversations with people I respect. I think including you in this one. You know, professional friends, actual personal friends. You know, that's got to be an important part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, the pace of change is hard. But try just to stay connected to people and to my health and to finding joy in what's happening in the world.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for being open there, John. Always so enriching to connect with you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. For folks that want to follow along with Phave, want to follow along with you personally, what's the best place for them to stay in touch?
LinkedIn, follow me there, connect with me there if you want. Mention you heard me on this. And if you are a mid-sized company looking about moving off of your marketing automation platform, you know, then give me a note and we can sort of explore whether being an early beta customer might make sense.
No better person in the world to talk to for that. So it's great. Thank you, John.
Cheers.